"Mom's sick, so I came instead." A little girl walked into the CEO's office. What the millionaire did. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The morning light poured through the tall glass windows of Coal Industries, casting pale streaks across the marble floor. The usual hum of printers, ringing phones, and hurried footsteps filled the vast lobby. But at 9 o'clock sharp, something unusual caught everyone's eye. Standing at the reception desk was a small girl no older than 7. Her brown hair tied into 2 uneven braids. Her shoes slightly too big for her feet. She clutched a folded piece of paper to her chest and looked up at the receptionist with eyes that were too brave for someone so young. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Mom is sick, so I came instead." The receptionist blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Honey, who is your mom?" The girl looked down at her paper, tracing the name written in careful adult handwriting. Martha Lewis. She was supposed to come clean Mr. Cole's office today. The woman behind the desk hesitated. Martha Lewis was one of the cleaning staff, but children were not allowed beyond the lobby. "Sweetheart, I am sorry, but you cannot," she began, when a calm, commanding voice interrupted from behind. "What is going on here?" Alexander Cole, the youngest CEO in the company's history, stood in the doorway. His dark suit was sharp, his expression unreadable. The girl turned toward him, clutching the paper tighter. "You are Mr. Cole?" she asked, her voice trembling but polite. He nodded slowly. "Yes, I am." She held out the note with both hands. "My mom wrote this before she got sick. She said she was sorry for not coming, but she told me she helps people shine, so I came to help." For a brief moment, the entire lobby fell silent. Alexander looked at the tiny note, the crayon drawing at the bottom, a stick-figure woman holding a mop under a shining Sunday. He felt something stir inside, something he had long buried beneath years of board meetings and stock reports. "Bring her a glass of milk," he told his assistant quietly. The receptionist hesitated. "Sir? Milk?" he repeated, his tone gentle yet firm. The little girl smiled shyly. "Thank you, Mr. Cole." The glass was brought, warm and simple. She held it with both hands, taking small, careful sips as she sat on the edge of the leather chair. Alexander watched her, the way she swung her legs slightly above the floor, the way she kept looking at the elevator doors, as if expecting her mother to appear. For a man used to silence and numbers, her presence felt like sunlight in a long-forgotten room. Without knowing why, he said softly, "Tell me, what is your name?" She looked up, eyes wide, and replied, "Lila." The name lingered in the air, delicate and unguarded. And for the first time in years, the mighty Alexander Cole smiled a real, human smile as the world inside his glass tower quietly began to change. The glass of milk was half empty when the elevator doors opened again. Employees stepped out, their polished shoes clicking on the marble floor, and each one slowed when they noticed the little girl sitting quietly in the executive lobby. She was still swinging her legs, humming a soft tune to herself, the folded letter resting on her lap. Across the room, Alexander Cole stood by the window, staring down at the city spread beneath him. He was used to power, to the hum of control that came with running one of the most profitable corporations in the country. But that morning, his routine had been interrupted by a pair of innocent eyes and a crayon drawing that said more than any business report ever could. His assistant, Melissa, approached carefully. "Sir, the morning meeting with the investors starts in 10 minutes. Should I have security escort the child out?" Alexander turned, his gaze steady. "No, she stays until I say otherwise." Melissa blinked, confused, but nodded and stepped back. The other executives whispered as they passed, curious but too afraid to question the CEO's decision. Alexander walked toward the reception desk, his tone measured but kind. "Lila, right? You said your mom was sick. Where is she now?" Lila looked up, her small fingers twisting around the edge of the paper. "At the hospital. She said it is just her heart being tired. She told me to stay home, but I did not want her to lose her job." Alexander crouched to her level, something no one in the building had ever seen him do. You came here all by yourself? She nodded, proudly holding up her backpack. It is not far. We live behind the bakery on 4th Street. I know how to cross when the light turns green. He exhaled slowly, torn between disbelief and admiration. The courage it must have taken for this little girl to walk all the way here. Did you eat breakfast? He asked. She shook her head. Mom said we could have pancakes when she gets better. Without hesitation, Alexander stood and turned to Melissa. Order pancakes from the cafe downstairs, strawberries on top. The assistant stared at him as if she had misheard, then hurried off. Lila's eyes lit up. Really? With syrup too? He smiled faintly. With syrup too. When the food arrived, she ate politely, thanking everyone who passed her with the kind of warmth that made people stop and smile. Even the security guard, a man known for never talking to anyone, slipped her an extra napkin and whispered, "For the syrup, sweetheart." Watching from his office doorway, Alexander felt something tighten in his chest. He had built an empire by never letting emotions cloud judgment, but the sight of that small girl alone, trying to protect her mother's job, made his usual detachment feel almost cruel. The next moment, the phone on his desk rang sharply. It was the hospital. Martha Lewis had listed Cole Industries as her emergency contact. The doctor explained that her condition had worsened overnight, and she was stable but needed rest. Alexander listened silently, then glanced toward the lobby where Lila was now sketching on a napkin with a borrowed pen. "Tell her daughter she is safe," he said softly before hanging up. He straightened his tie and stepped into the lobby once more. "Lila," he said, "would you like to visit your mom?" Her head shot up, eyes wide. "Can I?" "Yes, I will take you there myself." The staff froze as Alexander Cole, the untouchable CEO, offered his hand to a child in worn sneakers. She slipped her tiny fingers into his without hesitation. The drive to the hospital was quiet, except for the sound of rain beginning to patter against the windshield. Lila held the crayon drawing close, her eyes following the blurred city lights. Alexander glanced at her from the driver's seat. "Do you always draw?" he asked. She nodded. "Mom says drawing helps me be brave. When she feels sad, I draw sunshine for her." Her words landed softly, like a truth he had forgotten long ago. When they arrived, the nurse at the reception desk nearly dropped her clipboard at the sight of him. "Mr. Cole, sir, what brings you here?" "I am here for Martha Lewis," he said simply. "She works for us." The nurse nodded, leading them down the hall. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic, and the steady beeping of monitors echoed through the corridor. Lila squeezed his hand tighter. Inside the small hospital room, Martha lay pale against the white sheets, an oxygen tube resting under her nose. When she saw her daughter, tears welled in her tired eyes. "Lila, sweetheart, what are you?" Then she froze as her gaze shifted to the tall man behind her. "Mr. Cole?" she whispered. "I am so sorry, sir. I should not—" "Do not apologize," Alexander interrupted gently. "Your daughter told me you were unwell. The company can wait." Lila climbed onto the chair beside her mother's bed and placed the crayon drawing on the blanket. "See, Mom? I told you I could help you shine." The woman's lips trembled. Alexander stood quietly at the foot of the bed, his heart heavy. He had attended countless board meetings and closed multi-million-dollar deals, but he had never seen a kind of strength like this, love expressed through simplicity and sacrifice. Martha looked at him with disbelief. "You came all this way for us?" "She left me no choice," he said, half smiling. "She is very persuasive." For the first time in a long time, laughter filled the hospital room. It was soft, warm, and healing. As Alexander watched mother and daughter embrace, he realized something had shifted deep inside him. The girl who had walked into his office that morning had not only brought a letter, she had brought back something he did not know he had lost: compassion. And though he did not yet understand it, that single act of kindness was about to change both of their lives forever. The rain had stopped by the time Alexander and Lila left the hospital that evening. The city glistened under the streetlights, the air cool and damp, carrying the faint smell of asphalt and blooming magnolias. Alexander held the door open as Lila climbed into the back seat of the car, still holding her drawing. Her mother was stable, resting. And for the first time in days, the child looked peaceful. But Alexander's thoughts were restless. As the driver pulled away, he glanced at the reflection of the little girl in the rearview mirror. Her small face was pressed against the glass, watching the lights blur into golden trails. "Do you think my mom will be okay now?" she asked suddenly. "The doctor said she will recover," Alexander replied. "But she needs to rest," Lila nodded solemnly. "She works too hard because she wants me to have new shoes for school. I told her mine are still fine." She lifted one sneaker, the sole worn thin but patched carefully with glue. Alexander's chest tightened. He turned his gaze toward the rain-speckled window, the weight of her innocence pressing deeper than any boardroom argument ever could. When they arrived at her apartment building, a small, aging complex behind a bakery, he insisted on walking her upstairs. The hallway smelled faintly of sugar and detergent. The door to her home creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, the space was tidy but bare. A small couch, a table with 2 chairs, and drawings taped along the wall like decorations. A flickering lamp illuminated the words written in colorful crayon above them. "Shine, even when it is dark." Alexander looked around, his throat tight. Lila ran to the kitchen counter, rummaged in a tin box, and pulled out 2 cookies wrapped in napkins. "Mom made these yesterday," she said proudly. "You can have one because you helped us." He hesitated, then took it carefully, the taste simple and sweet. "Thank you, Lila." "You are welcome," she said, smiling so wide that her missing front tooth showed. "Mom says kindness always circles back." He looked at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 8 in the evening. "Do you have someone staying with you tonight?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "Mrs. Patel from next door checks on me. She said she will bring dinner later." Alexander nodded, though the thought of a 7-year-old alone in a small apartment tugged at him. "Lock the door after she leaves, all right?" "Yes, Mr. Cole," she promised. He smiled faintly. "Just Alexander is fine." "Okay, Alexander," she repeated shyly, the name sounding strange and careful in her voice. When he left, the hallway felt heavier somehow. On the drive home, his phone buzzed endlessly messages from his assistant. Updates from the board, reminders about the investor conference tomorrow. But for once, he silenced the phone and looked out at the city he thought he knew so well. Behind all its glitter and glass, there were lives like Lila's, quiet, unseen, fighting every day to shine. The next morning, Alexander arrived at Cole Industries earlier than usual. His reflection in the elevator doors looked different. There was a softness in his eyes that had not been there before. When he stepped into the executive floor, Melissa approached with her tablet. "Good morning, sir." "About yesterday." He raised a hand gently. "Call Human Resources. I want the cleaning staff under full health insurance coverage, starting this quarter." Melissa blinked in surprise. "All of them, sir?" "Yes, every single one." "Understood," she said, quickly noting it down, though she could not hide her astonishment. He paused before entering his office. "And Melissa, have someone check on Martha Lewis today. Make sure she gets everything she needs." "Yes, sir." As the morning went on, Alexander found himself distracted. Every corner of his office reminded him of that child, her paper folded neatly, her shoes squeaking on the polished floor, her quiet courage. At noon, he opened his desk drawer and found the note she had left behind. On the back of the crayon drawing was a small line written in uneven handwriting. "Thank you for helping Mom shine." He stared at it for a long time before finally setting it on the corner of his desk. That evening, while reviewing reports, his phone buzzed again. It was a message from an unknown number. "This is Mrs. Patel, Lila's neighbor. Lila wanted me to tell you she drew something new for you. She says it is a surprise." Without realizing it, he smiled. The next day, when he arrived at work, a small envelope sat on his desk. Inside was another drawing. A tall man holding hands with a little girl under a big yellow sundae. The words beneath read, "He helped the world shine." His chest tightened. He had built a life defined by results and numbers, but in that moment, he understood something deeper. Success meant nothing if it did not lift someone else with it. He placed the drawing inside a frame and set it beside his family photo, the one of his late mother, the woman who had once worked 2 jobs to put him through school. As he looked at the picture, a quiet thought formed in his mind. Maybe it was time to start something new. A place, a program, a foundation that could make sure people like Martha and children like Lila never had to face the world alone. He leaned back in his chair, the sounds of the city echoing below, and for the first time in years, the future felt less like a competition and more like a promise. The next chapter of his life had already begun, and it had started with 6 simple words written in a child's handwriting. "Mom is sick, so I came instead." The following week passed quietly, but nothing inside Coal Industries felt the same. The morning rush, once ruled by the rhythm of deadlines and profits, now carried an undertone of curiosity. Rumors spread like wind through the glass halls, stories about the CEO who had taken a janitor's daughter to the hospital and stayed with her family all night. Some employees whispered that the story could not possibly be true. Others swore they had seen him holding the little girl's hand. Alexander ignored the gossip. He spent his mornings reviewing hospital reports, and his evenings drafting a plan that had nothing to do with quarterly earnings. His assistant Melissa watched in disbelief as he filled a whiteboard with scribbles of words that did not sound corporate at all, words like care, kindness, dignity, and community. One afternoon she asked hesitantly, "Sir, are we changing our mission statement?" He paused, marker in hand, and replied, "Maybe we are changing our purpose." Later that day, a soft knock came at his office door. When he looked up, there stood Lila, her small frame almost swallowed by the oversized hoodie she wore. Behind her was her mother, Martha, pale but smiling. "We wanted to thank you, Mr. Cole," Martha said, her voice humble yet warm. "You did not have to do what you did." Alexander shook his head. "I did exactly what anyone should do." Lila stepped forward and placed a paper cup of milk on his desk. "You look tired," she said seriously. "Mom says milk helps." He chuckled quietly, the simple gesture softening the sharp edges of his long day. "Then I will take your mom's advice." He took a sip, and she smiled, satisfied. Martha glanced at the framed drawing on his desk and gasped softly. "Lila's art. You kept it?" "It reminds me of something important," he replied. "It reminds me why we work at all." That night, Alexander stayed late in the office. The city lights shimmered beyond the tall windows as he drafted a proposal titled Hearts at Work. It was a plan to create a community outreach program offering healthcare coverage, childcare, and education support for all lower-wage employees. He did not want it to be a publicity stunt. He wanted it to last. When dawn crept over the skyline, he pressed save and closed his laptop. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace. The next morning, the board meeting room was full. The long mahogany table gleamed under the cold lights, surrounded by men and women in tailored suits. Alexander stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled up, no tie, holding a folder marked Proposal. The directors exchanged puzzled looks. "Before we begin," he said calmly, "I want to talk about responsibility, not just to shareholders, but to people. With all due respect, Mr. Cole, this is a corporation, not a charity." "I am aware," Alexander replied evenly, "but a company that forgets its people forgets its future." He handed out printed copies of the plan. Hearts at Work is not a loss. It is an investment in loyalty, health, and humanity. Every success we have ever had began with the hands that cleaned these floors, prepared these reports, delivered our products. It is time we give something back. The CFO leaned forward, his tone sharp. "And how do you expect investors to react when they see our profit margins dip?" Alexander met his gaze without flinching. "They will see a company that stands for something real. And if they do not, then perhaps we do not need those kinds of investors." The room fell silent. He turned toward the window, his voice lower but firm. "When I was a boy, my mother worked double shifts so I could go to school. She never got the benefits she deserved. I built this company to prove her sacrifice meant something. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that lesson. A little girl reminded me." His eyes softened at the memory of Lila's crayon sundae. "She showed me what leadership really looks like." The CFO sat back, speechless. The chairman finally spoke. "You want to commit company funds to kindness, to people," Alexander corrected. To the people who make this place work. There was a long pause before the chairman finally sighed. You have always been a stubborn man, Cole. Let us see where your heart leads us. When the meeting ended, Alexander walked out into the bright morning air, feeling lighter than he had in years. Down in the lobby, he found Lila and Martha waiting with a small bouquet of daisies. We heard you were busy changing the world, Martha teased gently. Just trying to make it a little fairer, he said. Lila handed him a folded piece of paper. It is for your wall, she said shyly. He unfolded it. This time, the drawing showed 3 people standing under the same bright sun, the tall man, the woman, and the little girl holding both their hands. Beneath it, in uneven crayon letters, it read, When we shine kindness, we all shine. Alexander smiled, his voice thick with emotion. You have no idea how true that is, Lila. As they turned to leave, the light from the glass doors spilled across the marble floor, glimmering like gold. And in that quiet moment, Alexander Cole, the man who had once measured life in profits, realized he had found something worth far more than money. He had found meaning. The new initiative, called Hearts at Work, became the talk of the company within days. Posters were placed in every department, showing smiling employees, and the simple tagline written in soft blue letters, When we shine kindness, we all shine. It was the same line from Lila's drawing, the same words that had inspired Alexander to begin something bigger than himself. But not everyone saw it the same way. Some senior executives whispered that the CEO had lost his focus. Others worried about the financial implications. And one man, the chief financial officer, could not hide his frustration. You are turning a billion-dollar company into a charity, Alexander, he said during a late evening meeting. Our shareholders will not like this. Alexander looked at him calmly. Our shareholders will learn that compassion is not weakness. It is vision. The argument went nowhere, and the CFO left in anger. Later that night, Alexander stood alone in his office, watching the city lights flicker below. The reflection of the framed crayon drawing glowed faintly behind him. He thought of his mother, of her hands always tired, of her saying, Work should never cost you your humanity. For the first time in years, he felt he was finally honoring her memory. The following morning, Lila and Martha arrived at the company again, this time at Alexander's invitation. The reception staff, once hesitant around them, now greeted them with warm smiles. Mr. Cole is expecting you, the receptionist said cheerfully. When they entered his office, the entire desk was covered with folders and mock-ups. Alexander looked up and smiled. Lila, I have a question for you. You said your mother helps others shine, right? She nodded quickly. Yes, because clean floors make everything bright. He chuckled softly. Then maybe you can help me shine too. He pulled out a folder and handed it to her. Inside was a large sheet with the company's new logo. It showed a heart made of 2 hands and rays of sunlight extending outward. What do you think? Lila studied it carefully. It is nice, she said honestly, but it needs color. Sunshine is yellow, not gray. Alexander laughed quietly and turned to his marketing director. You heard her. Make the sunshine yellow. Martha shook her head in disbelief, her voice gentle but unsure. Mr. Cole, you do not need our approval for something like this. He looked at her kindly. Actually, I do. This began because of you two. It should look like both of you. The marketing director took notes as Lila described how the sunlight should look warm like morning milk, a phrase that made everyone in the room smile. Later, when they walked out of the office, Lila spotted the framed drawing in the lobby. It now hung under a gold plaque that read, Inspiration Behind the Hearts at Work program. She pointed at it proudly. Mom, that is mine! Martha's eyes shimmered with pride. Yes, baby, that is yours. Over the next few weeks, the Hearts at Work program began to take shape. Employees from all levels volunteered to join. Some helped organize medical checkups for staff, families, while others worked to provide after-school tutoring for employees' children. The atmosphere in the company changed in ways no financial report could measure. People smiled more. They greeted the janitors by name. They stayed late not because they were forced to, but because they believed in something. One afternoon, as Alexander toured one of the company's distribution centers, he noticed a group of workers repainting the break room. They had written on the wall in bright letters, "This place shines because we do." He stood there silently, feeling something rare and profound. That night, while reviewing the first progress report, He received a phone call from the hospital. It was Martha's doctor. She explained that Martha's condition required a minor procedure, nothing life-threatening, but it would be costly. Without hesitation, Alexander approved full medical coverage through the new program. When Martha found out, she called his office, her voice trembling. "Mr. Cole, I do not know how to thank you." "You already did," he said gently. "Every time you showed up, every time you worked hard, every time you raised your daughter to believe in kindness, that was thanks enough." As the days went on, the media began to notice. News outlets picked up the story. CEO turns company into a force for good. Reporters requested interviews, praising the Hearts at Work initiative. When one journalist asked Alexander what inspired him, he simply smiled and said, "A little girl walked into my office one morning and reminded me what leadership really means." He did not elaborate further. Some things, he believed, spoke for themselves. The next day, he received an envelope at his desk. It was from Lila. Inside was another drawing, a heart surrounded by stars and the words, "Thank you for helping us shine." Alexander placed it on the window, where the morning sun could pass through the paper and fill the room with light. He stood there for a long time, letting that light warm his face. The world outside continued to rush by meetings, numbers, traffic, but inside that office, time felt still, quiet, and full of meaning. And though he did not say it aloud, in his heart, Alexander Cole knew that the day a child walked into his life with nothing but a note and a drawing had been the beginning of everything good that followed. Months passed, and the Hearts at Work program grew beyond anything Alexander Cole had imagined. The once cold and distant corporation had become a place filled with laughter, purpose, and humanity. Employees began bringing their families to weekend volunteer days, transforming the company's parking lot into a playground of painted murals, small gardens, and food stands that raised money for local hospitals. Martha Lewis, now fully recovered, was one of the most active participants. She organized care packages for employees who were struggling and led cleaning teams that visited schools in low-income neighborhoods. When reporters asked her why she did it, she smiled humbly and said, "Because someone believed in my little girl, and in doing that, he reminded all of us that kindness can build an empire." Lila had become something of a beloved figure in the company. Every time she visited, she brought new drawings for Alexander's office walls. There were pictures of suns, hearts, and even one of a tall man giving a flower to a nurse. The employees called her the sunshine of coal industries. But for Alexander, she was more than that. She was the reason he woke up each day wanting to do better. One Friday evening, as the office emptied and the golden light of sunset spilled across the floor, Alexander stood by the window holding a new letter from the board. It congratulated him on the company's record-breaking quarter. Despite initial fears, the Hearts at Work program had improved productivity and reduced turnover. Kindness, it turned out, had a measurable return. Yet as he read the letter, a strange feeling of restlessness tugged at him. The numbers were good, yes, but what came next? He looked over at the framed drawings and the empty glass of milk on his desk, the one Lila had brought him weeks earlier. For the first time, he realized that success alone no longer defined him. He wanted something deeper, a purpose that outlived profits. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. "Come in," he said. It was Melissa, holding a small box. "Sir, this arrived for you. No return address." Alexander opened it carefully. Inside was a handmade bracelet woven from colorful threads, the kind children made at school. Attached to it was a note in uneven handwriting, "For when you forget to smile," from Lila. He smiled and slipped the bracelet onto his wrist, the bright colors stark against his crisp white shirt. "She is something special," Melissa said warmly. "She is hope," Alexander replied quietly. That weekend, he decided to visit Lila and Martha at their apartment. The smell of fresh bread from the bakery below filled the hallway. When Martha opened the door, she looked surprised. "Mr. Cole, please come in." Inside, the small apartment looked brighter than before. The walls were now covered with new drawings, some from Lila, some from children in the neighborhood who had joined her weekend art sessions. On the table was a sign written in colorful letters, "Shine Club." Lila ran out from her room, her face lighting up when she saw him. Alexander, you came! I did, he said, crouching to her level. I wanted to see what you have been working on. She pulled his hand toward the table proudly. It is the Shine Club! We make cards and pictures for people who are sad or sick. Mom says smiles can heal too. Alexander looked at the stack of handmade cards covered in glitter, hearts, and crooked suns. You are running your own charity? He asked playfully. It is not a charity, she corrected seriously. It is a promise to make the world shine. Her words struck him deeply. That night, as he drove home, the bracelet on his wrist caught the glow of the streetlights. The more he thought about the Shine Club, the more he realized it embodied everything he wanted the Hearts at Work Foundation to become: something organic, sincere, born from love rather than corporate planning. The following week, during a company-wide meeting, he announced the next phase. We are expanding Hearts at Work, he said, standing before hundreds of employees gathered in the atrium. We will open community centers across the country under a new name, the Shine Initiative. These centers will provide medical assistance, education, and support for families in need, and the first one will be named after the little girl who inspired us all. The room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed as Alexander revealed the new logo, a bright yellow sun drawn in crayon, identical to the one Lila had made. When the ceremony ended, he looked out over the crowd and saw Martha wiping tears from her eyes. Later, as everyone celebrated, Lila approached him shyly, holding a small cup of milk. For good luck, she said. He took it, raising the cup like a toast. To shining kindness, he said. And to you, Lila, for reminding us how. The crowd cheered again, but Alexander's eyes were on the little girl who had walked into his office months ago with nothing but courage and a note from her sick mother. She had changed everything: his company, his outlook, and perhaps even the world around him. As the evening light faded, the building glowed with soft golden hues, reflecting the warmth that now lived within its walls. For the first time in his life, Alexander Cole understood that true leadership was not measured in titles or balance sheets, but in the light one could leave behind in others. And in that light, he finally found peace. The Shine Initiative spread faster than anyone could have predicted. Within a few months, Cole Industries transformed from a traditional corporation into a nationwide movement for social good. The first Shine Center opened in the heart of the city, a bright building filled with color, laughter, and light. Children's drawings lined the walls, and the entrance featured a glass mural designed by local artists, a giant sun with rays that reached across the lobby, symbolizing unity and warmth. On the day of the grand opening, hundreds gathered outside, including employees, families, and community members. News outlets called it a new era of corporate humanity. Alexander Cole stood on the stage, microphone in hand, looking out at the crowd. Behind him hung a banner that read, "Together we shine." Cameras flashed as he began to speak. A few months ago, he said, his voice steady but warm, a little girl walked into my office to deliver a message from her sick mother. She reminded me that leadership is not about power, it is about compassion. That moment changed my life, and today, I hope it changes many more. The crowd applauded, and standing near the front row, Martha held Lila close. The little girl's face glowed with excitement as she waved shyly at the cameras. After the ribbon was cut, Alexander guided Lila and her mother inside. The center was buzzing with volunteers, offering free health checkups, job counseling, and tutoring programs for children. In one corner, an artist painted a live mural of people holding hands beneath a shining sundae. Lila tugged at Alexander's sleeve. It looks like your office wall, but bigger, she said proudly. Yes, he replied with a smile, and it is only the beginning. As the day went on, Alexander spoke with families, shook hands with volunteers, and helped serve lunch at the community kitchen. It was exhausting, but in a way that filled him with energy rather than drained it. He had never felt more alive. That evening, when the event finally quieted down, Alexander stood near the entrance, watching the sunset cast gold across the building's glass front. Martha approached him softly. You did something extraordinary today, she said. No, he corrected gently. We did. She hesitated before adding, You know, when I first came to this city, I used to clean offices just to survive. I never imagined standing beside the man who owns one of them, building something that changes lives. Alexander looked at her with genuine respect. You were never just cleaning offices, Martha, you were building hope. You taught your daughter to shine, and she taught me to remember what matters. She smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. Just then, Lila came running toward them, holding a small potted sunflower. This is for you, she said breathlessly. So you can always have sunshine, even when it rains. Alexander accepted the flower with both hands, touched by the gesture. I will take good care of it, he promised. Promise you will water it every day, she insisted. A sunflower needs love to grow. I think we all do, he said softly. As they laughed, a photographer captured the moment the CEO of a global corporation kneeling beside a little girl holding a sunflower, both smiling under the fading light. The image would soon go viral, spreading across social media with the caption, "The day kindness took root." That night, Alexander returned to his office, the sunflower on his desk beside Lila's old drawing. He stared at the two symbols, the flower and the crayon sun, and realized how far they had come. But success, as he knew too well, often drew attention from those who did not understand. A few weeks later, during a board meeting, one of the investors voiced concerns. The Shine Initiative is inspiring, yes, the man said, but it is expensive. The profit margins are shrinking. Are we running a business or a charity? The words stung, but Alexander stayed calm. We are running a company that understands people are its greatest investment, he replied firmly. The Shine Initiative is not a cost, it is a commitment. The room fell silent, but the investor's skeptical glance made it clear that not everyone shared his faith. That evening, as Alexander left the building, the rain began to fall, soft and steady. He walked past the reflection of his own face in the glass, older now, maybe wiser, definitely changed. He looked down at the bracelet still around his wrist, its colors slightly faded but still bright. It reminded him of Lila's voice, small but certain. A sunflower needs love to grow. The next morning, he visited the Shine Center again. The halls were filled with life families laughing, volunteers greeting new arrivals, and in the art room, children painting a giant mural that said, "Kindness never ends." Alexander stood quietly, watching Lila teach another child how to draw the perfect sundae. Her laughter echoed through the room, pure and infectious. For a brief second, he imagined his late mother standing beside him, smiling with pride. Maybe, in some way, she was. As he walked out into the morning light, he whispered to himself, "Yes, Lila. Sunshine even when it rains." He tightened the bracelet on his wrist and smiled. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, Alexander Cole no longer feared the storms. He knew the world could still shine through them. Autumn arrived with a golden hush that wrapped the city in warmth. The Shine Center was now a beacon of color in a world that often rushed too fast to notice small kindnesses. Every morning, families lined up outside, not for charity, but for hope, a place where people helped one another without being asked. Alexander Cole visited often, not as a CEO, but as a volunteer. He spent hours serving meals, arranging books for the children's corner, or simply listening to people's stories. For the first time, the man who had once lived for deadlines now lived for connections. On one crisp morning, as leaves drifted across the sidewalk, Alexander parked his car and noticed Lila sitting on the steps of the Shine Center, her sketchbook open on her lap. Her mother Martha was inside leading a new workshop on job readiness for single parents. Alexander approached quietly. "That is a beautiful drawing," he said. Lila looked up and smiled. "It is the Shine Center, but from the sky," she explained, turning the book so he could see. The page was filled with bright colors, yellow, blue, and pink, showing the building surrounded by rays of sunshine reaching far beyond the city. "Mom says the Shine Center makes everyone feel bigger on the inside," she said proudly. "That sounds like something your mom would say," he replied, sitting beside her. "How have you been, Lila?" "Good," she said, swinging her legs. "But Mom still gets tired sometimes. I tell her to rest, but she says helping others gives her energy." Alexander smiled. "She is right. Sometimes giving is what keeps us alive." They sat quietly for a moment, watching people walk in and out of the center. Then Lila looked up again. "Alexander, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Were you lonely before you met us?" The question caught him off guard. He looked at her innocent face, and then at the sunlight reflecting off the building's glass windows. Yes, he admitted softly. I was very lonely. I thought being successful would make me happy, but it only made me tired. She nodded with a wisdom far beyond her years. That is why you needed sunshine, she said simply. Everybody does. He chuckled quietly. You may be right about that. Later that afternoon, Alexander joined Martha's workshop. The room was filled with parents, eager to learn skills that could help them find stable jobs. He sat in the back, listening as Martha spoke about confidence, perseverance, and community. When the session ended, one woman approached her in tears. I got hired because of your advice, she said. You changed my life. Martha hugged her tightly, whispering, No, you did that yourself. Watching her, Alexander felt something stirred deep inside him, a sense of pride not just for the foundation, but for the woman who had once been his employee, now transforming lives with her strength and grace. That evening, he invited Martha and Lila to dinner at a small family restaurant near the river. It was simple, with string lights and wooden tables, the kind of place where conversations lingered longer than meals. You both deserve a celebration, he said as they sat down. For everything you have done. Lila clapped her hands. Can we have pie too? Of course, he laughed. As they ate, they talked about the future, the next Shine Center opening in another city, Martha's plans to train more mentors, and Lila's dream of becoming an artist who painted happiness for hospitals. You know, Alexander said, when I was your age, I used to draw too, but my pictures were of tall buildings and office towers. I thought success looked like glass and steel. And now? Lila asked between bites of pie. He smiled, glancing at her and her mother. Now I think success looks more like sunshine and people smiling. Martha looked at him, her voice soft but certain. You have done more good than you realize, Alexander. I have only returned what you and Lila gave me, he said quietly. You reminded me that business can build hearts, not just wealth. Outside, the river shimmered under the moonlight. The city skyline reflected in the water, its lights dancing like fireflies. For a moment, everything felt still, no noise, no rush, just peace. On their way out, Lila stopped by the railing and held up her drawing against the night sky. Look, she said, the city is glowing like the Shine Center. Alexander and Martha both looked up. She was right. The reflection of the lights in the water made the whole city look alive, as if kindness itself had spilled into the streets. When he dropped them home later, Lila handed him the sketch she had been working on all day. It is for you, she said. The drawing showed the three of them standing in front of the Shine Center, surrounded by beams of light. Above it were the words, Thank you for finding the sunshine. He took the picture carefully, feeling his throat tighten. Thank you for showing it to me, Lila. As he drove away, he placed the drawing on the seat beside him, unable to stop smiling. That night, he framed it and hung it above his desk, right beside the first crayon sun she had ever given him. Together they told a story of a little girl's courage, a mother's strength, and a man's rediscovered heart. And as the soft hum of the city filled the air, Alexander Cole whispered to himself, When we shine kindness, we all shine. Winter crept into the city quietly, frosting rooftops and wrapping every streetlight in a silver glow. The Shine Center, however, remained a place of warmth. Inside, the laughter of children mixed with the sound of volunteers, serving hot soup and distributing blankets to families in need. The large glass windows glimmered with paper snowflakes cut out by the kids, and in the middle of the lobby stood a Christmas tree covered with handmade ornaments, each one painted with words like hope, love, and shine. Alexander Cole arrived early that morning, dressed simply in a wool coat and scarf. He carried boxes of gifts his employees had donated for the community. When he entered, Lila spotted him instantly and ran over, her cheeks rosy from the cold. Alexander, she exclaimed, you are here. He smiled warmly. I would not miss this, Lila. Are you helping decorate? I am in charge of the star, she said proudly, holding up a glittering gold paper star she had made herself. It goes on top last. Then it must be the most important piece, he said. Do you want help putting it up? She nodded eagerly. He lifted her gently so she could reach the top of the tree, her small hands steady as she placed the star in its place. When she finished, everyone clapped, and her smile could have lit the entire room. Martha watched from across the lobby, her eyes shining with pride and gratitude. As the celebration continued, local reporters arrived to cover the event. They filmed Alexander handing out presents, Lila leading a small group of children singing Christmas songs, and volunteers embracing one another as they worked. Later, a journalist approached Alexander for an interview. "Mr. Cole," she began, "the Shine Initiative has transformed thousands of lives. What drives you to keep expanding it?" Alexander looked around at the joyful chaos and then back at her. "Because every act of kindness creates a ripple," he said. "And if we keep spreading those ripples, eventually, the whole world will feel the warmth." That night, after the event ended and the building grew quiet, Alexander stayed behind to help clean up. Lila had fallen asleep on a couch, her head resting on her mother's lap, her hands still clutching a small ornament shaped like a heart. Martha smiled softly as Alexander approached. "She did not want to go home," Martha whispered. "She said the Shine Center feels like Christmas all the time." "She is right," Alexander said, lowering his voice. "It feels like home." Martha looked up at him, her tone gentle but serious. "You have given so much of yourself to this, Alexander. You have changed so many lives. But, are you taking care of yours?" He hesitated, caught off guard. "I am fine," he said with a small smile, though his eyes betrayed a quiet exhaustion. "You cannot pour from an empty cup," she reminded him softly. Her words lingered in his mind long after he left that night. The following morning, Alexander sat in his office staring out the window as snowflakes drifted past the glass. The city was hushed, blanketed in white. His assistant Melissa entered with a folder of reports. "Good news, sir," she said. "The Shine Centers in 3 other states are now fully funded. We are changing lives everywhere." He nodded slowly. "That is wonderful, Melissa. Thank you." She paused before leaving. "Sir, are you all right? You have been working non-stop for months." He forced a reassuring smile. "I am all right, just thinking." After she left, he leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. For the first time in a long while, he felt the weight of everything, the meetings, the plans, the expectations. But then, he remembered Lila's drawing, the one that hung behind him, the 3 of them standing in front of the Shine Center with sunlight bursting above. He opened his eyes and turned to look at it. The colors seemed brighter that morning. Later that day, he received a phone call from the hospital, the same hospital where he had first met Martha and Lila months ago. The administrator explained that the children's ward was overcrowded for the holidays, and they were short on supplies. Without hesitation, Alexander promised immediate help. Within hours, he and his team arrived at the hospital with boxes of toys, blankets, and art kits. When the children saw the crayons and paint sets, their faces lit up. Lila, who had come along to help, immediately began organizing a drawing of hope wall in the hallway. She encouraged each child to draw something that made them happy. By evening, the wall was filled with sunshine, hearts, flowers, and smiling faces. As Alexander stood watching, one little boy approached him shyly and handed him a picture. "This is you," the boy said, pointing at the drawing of a tall man with a sunflower in his hand. "You bring light." Alexander felt a lump form in his throat. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That means a lot." When he turned, he saw Martha watching him, her expression soft and knowing. "You have become a hero to so many, Alexander," she said. "Not a hero," he replied, shaking his head gently. "Just someone who finally remembered what it means to care." That night, as he drove home through the softly falling snow, the city glowed like a dream, storefronts twinkling, street lamps casting halos on the white streets, and the Shine Center standing tall in the distance, its lights bright against the dark sky. He thought about how far they had all come since that first day when a little girl had walked into his office with a note that said, "Mom is sick, so I came instead." That moment had started it all, and as the snowflakes settled on his windshield, Alexander Cole realized that sometimes the smallest acts of courage could lead to the brightest light. And in that quiet, snowy night, he whispered the words that had become the foundation of his new life. "When we shine kindness, we all shine." The new year began with a sunrise so bright that it painted the city in shades of gold and pink. For Alexander Cole, it felt like the world itself was starting fresh. The Shine Centers had become the heartbeats of several communities, places where people came not only for help but for hope. News outlets were calling it a revolution of compassion. Alexander's name was everywhere, magazines, talk shows, interviews, but the recognition meant little to him. What mattered most were the faces he saw each week at the centers. Children laughing, parents finding strength, and volunteers giving their time freely. On one crisp January morning, Alexander drove to the original Shine Center, carrying a box filled with books for the children's library. The moment he walked through the doors, he was greeted by a chorus of voices, shouting his name. "Alexander! Alexander!" Lila came running, her scarf trailing behind her. "You are just in time. We are building something special." He raised an eyebrow, smiling. "Something special? What could be more special than the Shine Center?" "A secret," she said, lowering her voice dramatically. "Come and see." She led him through the hallway to the art room, where a group of children were gathered around a large canvas on the floor. It was a mural filled with bright colors, suns, hearts, and handprints. At the top, in big bold letters, it said, "The world shines brighter together." Alexander knelt beside them, studying the art. "This is incredible," he said sincerely. "Who came up with the idea?" Lila grinned. "It was Mom's idea, but we all helped." Martha, standing nearby with a paintbrush in hand, laughed softly. "I just gave them the supplies. They did the rest." Alexander looked at the vibrant wall, his chest swelling with pride. "This is more than a mural. This is a message." The children cheered, splattering more paint with excitement. As the day went on, Alexander stayed to help hang decorations for the Shine Center's one-year anniversary celebration. The air was full of music and laughter, and the smell of warm cookies drifted from the kitchen. At one point, Lila handed him a microphone. "You have to make a speech," she insisted. "It is your center." He shook his head playfully. "Our center, Lila. Ours." Still, when the crowd gathered, all eyes turned to him. He took the microphone, pausing for a moment to look around the room at the faces of people from every background, every walk of life. "1 year ago," he began, "a little girl walked into my office with a simple message. Mom is sick, so I came instead. That day changed everything. I thought I was teaching kindness through this foundation, but it turns out I was the one being taught. You have all shown me that leadership is not about control, it is about connection." The crowd applauded, and Lila beamed. Martha wiped a tear discreetly, proud beyond words. "This is not the end of something," Alexander continued. "It is the beginning of something much bigger. Every act of kindness you give out makes this world a little brighter. And together, we shine." The room erupted with cheers, the kind that seemed to vibrate with pure joy. After the event, as people mingled, Alexander walked over to a window overlooking the city. Snow had started to fall again, soft and slow, blanketing everything in white. Martha joined him quietly. "You should be proud," she said. "Look at what you built." He shook his head gently. "We built it," he corrected. "You and Lila showed me what light looks like. I only helped it spread." She smiled. "You have changed more lives than you will ever know." "Maybe," he said softly. "But the life that changed the most was mine." Outside, the snowflakes reflected the glow of the streetlights, turning the world into a sea of shimmering silver. Just then, Lila ran up to them holding 2 paper cups of hot chocolate. "Mom, Alexander, you forgot to celebrate with us." She handed each of them a cup and giggled. "You cannot have an anniversary without chocolate." "You are absolutely right," Alexander said with a laugh. "Cheers to 1 year of shining together." They clinked their cups gently, the steam rising like a promise into the air. That night, when Alexander returned home, he sat in his quiet apartment and looked around. For years, his walls had been decorated with awards and business plaques. Now, they were covered with Lila's drawings, photos from the Shine Center, and handwritten notes from people whose lives had changed. One note stood out. It was from Martha. In her neat handwriting, she had written, "Thank you for believing in us before we believed in ourselves." He read it twice, then looked out the window at the city below. The streets glowed like rivers of light. And for the first time in his life, Alexander did not see skyscrapers or prophets, he saw people. He thought about how strange life was, how a single act of courage from a child could alter the course of an empire. As the snow continued to fall, he whispered softly to the night. When we shine kindness, we all shine. And somewhere in the distance, beneath that same sky, a little girl named Lila was probably smiling in her sleep, dreaming of new suns to draw when morning came. The following weeks brought a new kind of energy to Cole Industries. The company was no longer just a business, it had become a living symbol of compassion and progress. Every Monday morning, employees gathered in the lobby beneath the framed motto that had become their promise. When we shine kindness, we all shine. It was written in Lila's handwriting, immortalized in gold lettering across the marble wall. Alexander Cole arrived early every day, carrying the same leather notebook where he recorded stories from the Shine Centers. He called it the Book of Light, filled with letters, photos, and testimonies from people whose lives had been touched. He often said that it reminded him why success mattered only when shared. On one bright February morning, as the first signs of spring began to show, Alexander hosted a meeting with the company's department heads. The topic was the next stage of the Shine initiative, expanding it into rural areas where support systems were limited. "We have the funding," he said confidently, pointing to a map spread across the table. "But we need the right people to lead these centers. People with heart." Melissa, his longtime assistant, raised a question. "Sir, have you considered Martha Lewis? She already manages the original Shine Center's programs better than anyone." The room murmured in agreement. Alexander's eyes softened. "Yes," he said thoughtfully. "She would be perfect." The decision was unanimous. That afternoon, he visited the Shine Center to share the news. When Martha saw him walk in, she smiled warmly. "You look like a man with good news," she said. "I hope so," he replied. "Martha, I want you to lead the expansion of the Shine initiative. You have built something here that inspires thousands. It is time we bring that light to more people." She froze, speechless for a moment. "Alexander, I do not know what to say." "Say yes," he said with a grin. Tears filled her eyes. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Nearby, Lila overheard the conversation and gasped. "Mom, you are going to be the boss of all the Shine Centers?" Martha laughed. "Something like that, sweetheart." Lila ran to Alexander and hugged him tightly. "Thank you, Alexander. You are the best." He knelt down and said gently, "No, Lila, your mom is. She has always been." The following weeks were a blur of activity as Martha began training new coordinators. Alexander often joined the sessions, offering guidance but letting her lead. Watching her command the room with confidence and compassion filled him with pride. She had grown from a quiet employee into a leader who inspired others. Lila, of course, became the unofficial mascot of the expansion project. She made colorful posters with messages like, "Help others shine," and "Kindness is the strongest light." Her drawings decorated every office and meeting room. One afternoon, as Alexander reviewed blueprints for the new centers, he noticed a folded note slipped under his door. It was written in crayon. "Alexander, when I grow up, I want to work at the Shine Center too, but I will be the one who paints the walls yellow because yellow makes people happy." From Lila. He smiled, feeling that familiar warmth spread through him. Later that week, Cole Industries held a press conference to announce the expansion. Cameras flashed, microphones filled the air, and reporters crowded the stage. When Alexander stepped forward to speak, he did not read from his prepared statement. Instead, he spoke from the heart. "This journey began with a mistake that turned into a miracle. A little girl walked into my office to help her mother, and in doing so, she helped me rediscover the purpose of leadership. The Shine Initiative exists because kindness still matters, and because ordinary people can do extraordinary things when given the chance." The audience rose in applause. Martha stood beside him, her hands clasped tightly, her expression full of emotion. Lila stood in front, holding her sunflower high like a banner. After the event, as the crowd dispersed, a journalist approached Alexander. "Mr. Cole," she asked, "you have redefined what it means to be a business leader. What is next for you?" He paused for a moment, then glanced at Martha and Lila. "What is next?" he repeated softly. "More light, always more light." That evening, back in his office, the city lights shimmered like scattered stars. Alexander sat quietly, the framed drawings on his wall, glowing in the soft lamplight. His gaze fell on the very first one, the stick-figure woman with a mop under a bright sun, drawn by a little girl who had simply wanted to help her mother. He realized then that everything, the foundation, the change, the joy had grown from that single act of courage. He reached for his pen and opened the Book of Light. On a fresh page he wrote, "Today, Martha Lewis was appointed director of the Shine Initiative. A mother who once feared losing her job now leads a movement changing lives across the nation. Her daughter continues to teach us that happiness is not something we earn, but something we share." He closed the notebook and looked out at the skyline. The night seemed brighter somehow, as if the city itself had learned to shine. For the first time in his life, Alexander Cole did not wonder about the future. He trusted it, because he knew that as long as kindness existed, the light would never fade. Spring turned into summer, and with it came a new chapter for everyone connected to the Shine Initiative. Under Martha's leadership, the expansion began to flourish. New centers opened in small towns, each carrying the same warmth and authenticity as the original. The walls were painted yellow, just as Lila had dreamed, and every lobby displayed her drawing of the bright sun with the words, "When we shine kindness, we all shine." The movement had grown far beyond anyone's expectations. What started as one act of compassion now reached hundreds of families across the country. Every week, Alexander received letters from people thanking him for the opportunity to rebuild their lives, find jobs, or simply feel seen again. He often read those letters late at night in his quiet office, each word reminding him how deeply one person's kindness could ripple through the world. Yet, even as everything thrived, Alexander began to feel the familiar weight of pressure from the corporate world pressing against his ideals. Some investors still questioned the sustainability of his humanitarian approach. One afternoon, during a high-level meeting, a board member said coldly, "The Shine Initiative is inspiring, Mr. Cole, but our profits are flattening. You are running a company, not a charity." Alexander leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. "We are running both a company that succeeds because it cares. Compassion and profit are not enemies." There was silence around the table. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Melissa, who had been sitting quietly beside him, said softly, "Maybe that is the point. We have proved that humanity and success can coexist." The tension broke, and Alexander gave a small, grateful smile. "Exactly," he said. "That is our legacy." Later that week, Alexander visited the first Shine Center to unwind. It was late in the afternoon, and the sun cast golden rays through the wide windows. Inside, children were painting, parents were sharing stories, and volunteers were organizing books on the shelves. Martha spotted him from across the room. "You look like a man who needs a break," she said teasingly. He chuckled. "You are not wrong. The board thinks I am crazy again." "They thought that the first time too," she reminded him gently. "And look where that got us." Lila ran up just then, carrying a stack of handmade cards. "Alexander! We made these for the new Shine Centers." Each card was covered with crayon hearts and little suns. "They are perfect," he said, kneeling to her level. "You know, I think your drawings make people feel brave," she beamed. "That is what Mom says too." As they talked, a young woman approached Martha nervously. "Miss Lewis, can I speak with you?" she asked. Martha nodded, and they stepped aside. The woman explained that she was a single mother who had just been hired through the Shine Initiative's job placement program. She wanted to thank Martha personally. Tears filled her eyes as she said, "This center gave me hope when I had none left. You reminded me that I matter." Martha embraced her gently, saying, "You always mattered. You just needed someone to remind you." Watching the exchange, Alexander felt a deep sense of pride. What he had once envisioned as a small outreach project had grown into something sacred, a living, breathing symbol of second chances. That evening, after everyone left, he and Martha stood in the quiet lobby. The golden sunlight reflected off the framed drawing on the wall, the one that had started it all. "Do you ever think about how much has changed?" she asked. "Every day," he admitted. "Sometimes I wonder what my mother would think if she could see all of this." Martha smiled. "I think she would be proud. You have built something that heals people." He looked around the bright room, his eyes soft. "I think Lila built it. I just followed her light. The next morning, Alexander met with a journalist from a major magazine who wanted to write a feature about the Shine Initiative. During the interview, she asked, "What do you think was the turning point for you, Mr. Cole? The moment that made you choose kindness over control?" He thought for a moment before answering. "It was not a moment," he said quietly. "It was a person. A little girl walked into my office one morning and reminded me what it means to care. Her honesty changed everything. Sometimes, the smallest voices speak the loudest truths." The article was published a week later with the headline, "The CEO Who Learned to Lead from a Child." It went viral overnight, touching hearts around the world. Letters poured in from people who had been inspired to start their own community projects. One even read, "You reminded us that kindness can be a business model." When Lila saw the article, she ran into his office waving the magazine. "Alexander, you are famous again." He laughed. "You mean we are famous?" "No," she said with mock seriousness. "You are the famous one. I am the artist." He placed a hand over his heart. "And that makes us the perfect team." As summer deepened, the Shine Initiative continued to grow, and Alexander knew there would always be challenges ahead. But for the first time in his life, he did not fear them. He had learned that when light spreads, it never truly fades. That night, standing by his office window as the city glowed below, he whispered the words that had become his compass. "When we shine kindness, we all shine." And somewhere across town, in a small apartment above a bakery, a little girl named Lila looked at the same sky and whispered them too. Autumn returned once again, painting the city in warm shades of gold and amber. For Alexander Cole, the season carried a quiet rhythm of gratitude. The Shine Initiative had become a nationwide movement, with dozens of centers spreading light in every direction. Each week brought new success stories, families reunited, children finding hope, communities learning to care for one another. But beneath the glow of success, a new challenge was quietly forming. The corporate board, still anchored in old-world thinking, began to grow uneasy about the amount of funding directed towards social projects. During a late-evening board meeting, one of the senior investors spoke sharply. "Mr. Cole, you are bleeding profits into a charity dream. The Shine Initiative is beautiful, but it is not sustainable. The company was not built to carry the world's burdens." Alexander leaned forward, calm but resolute. "It was built to make the world better. That is our greatest profit." The man shook his head. "Our shareholders disagree." The tension in the room was thick. Alexander looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes. "When we first started this, you all thought it was a risk, and it was. But that risk became our strength. We have grown not in spite of compassion, but because of it. Look at the loyalty, the public trust, the innovation our people bring. That is the real measure of success." His words lingered in the silence that followed. Finally, the chairman cleared his throat. "You have our respect, Alexander. But understand that idealism and business rarely share the same bed for long." The meeting ended, but the words stayed with him. That night, Alexander walked alone through the nearly empty Shine Center. The soft hum of the lights, the faint scent of paint and paper, and the laughter of distant volunteers echoed faintly. He stopped in front of the framed drawing that had started it, all the simple crayon sun drawn by a little girl with a heart big enough to move mountains. As he stared at it, he whispered, "We will keep shining, no matter what." The next day, Martha found him sitting at the coffee station, uncharacteristically quiet. "You look like someone who spent the night fighting ghosts," she said gently. He smiled faintly. "Something like that." She sat across from him. "The board again?" "Yes. They think kindness is too expensive." Martha stirred her coffee slowly. "Kindness always costs something, Alexander. But so does indifference. One builds the world, the other breaks it." Her words hit him deeply. "You always know the right thing to say," he said softly. "That is because I have lived the wrong things before," she replied with a smile. Later that afternoon, Alexander was scheduled to give a speech at the University of Chicago, where business students had invited him to speak about ethical leadership. Standing before hundreds of eager faces, he began without notes. "When I was your age," he said, "I thought leadership was about power, about being the one who knew the answers. But I was wrong. Leadership is about listening to your people, to the world, and sometimes To a little girl who reminds you that you have forgotten how to care. The room fell silent, every word sinking deep. You will be told that empathy makes you weak, he continued. Do not believe it. The world does not need more ruthless leaders, it needs more human ones. When he finished, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Students lined up to shake his hand, thanking him for changing the way they saw success. As he left the stage, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Melissa. Emergency at the Shine Center. Call immediately. His heart dropped. He stepped outside, dialed her number, and listened as she explained breathlessly. There was an accident. A delivery truck lost control outside the Shine Center. Lila and some of the children were in the yard decorating for the autumn festival. The paramedics are there now. Alexander froze. Is she? She is alive, Melissa said quickly, but she was taken to the hospital. Without another word, he hung up and ran. The drive felt endless. Rain began to fall, blurring the city lights as sirens wailed in the distance. By the time he reached the hospital, his coat was soaked through. He pushed through the emergency room doors, his chest tight. Martha was there, her face pale, her hands trembling. She is in surgery, she whispered. They said she will be okay, but they need to stop the bleeding. Alexander placed a hand on her shoulder. She is strong, Martha. She is the strongest person I know. They sat in silence for what felt like hours, the rhythmic beeping of machines echoing through the hall. For the first time in years, Alexander felt powerless. All his wealth, all his influence, none of it mattered now. All he could do was wait. When the surgeon finally emerged, his expression was calm. She is stable, he said gently. The surgery went well. She is resting now. Martha broke into tears of relief, and Alexander felt his knees weaken. Can we see her? In a few minutes, the doctor replied. She is still waking up. When they finally entered the room, Lila lay small and fragile against the white sheets, a bandage on her forehead. Her fingers twitched slightly as she opened her eyes. Mom? She whispered. Martha leaned in, her voice trembling. I am here, baby. Lila blinked slowly, then saw Alexander standing nearby. You came, she murmured. He smiled softly, his eyes glistening. Of course I came. You promised to show me your new drawing, remember? Her lips curved into the faintest smile. It is of the sun and us. Then I cannot wait to see it, he said, squeezing her small hand gently. In that sterile hospital room, surrounded by the quiet hum of machines, Alexander Cole understood something deeper than ever before. Kindness was not just about changing the world. It was about saving it, one heartbeat at a time. The hospital room was quiet, except for the steady beeping of the heart monitor and the soft hum of machines that kept rhythm with Lila's breathing. The scent of antiseptic hung faintly in the air, mingling with the distant sound of footsteps echoing through the hallway. Alexander sat in the corner, still in his rain-soaked clothes, his elbows resting on his knees, his eyes fixed on the little girl lying in the bed. Her small hand rested on top of the blanket, pale but warm. Martha sat beside her daughter, brushing strands of hair away from her forehead, whispering prayers under her breath. Hours passed, like slow-moving clouds. Every tick of the clock felt heavy, reminding Alexander of how fragile everything was. All the money, the achievements, the awards, none of it mattered now. The only thing that mattered was the quiet rise and fall of that child's chest. Somewhere deep inside, he replayed the first moment he had met her, how she had walked into his office, clutching that crumpled note, her voice trembling but determined. Mom is sick, so I came instead. Those words had changed everything, and now, as she lay before him, it felt as though the universe was reminding him that kindness, once found, must always be protected. A nurse entered the room quietly to check the monitors. Her vitals are good, she said softly. She is resting well. You should both get some sleep. Martha shook her head. I will stay. Alexander nodded. Me too. The nurse smiled gently. Then I will bring you some coffee. After she left, the room settled into stillness again. Alexander watched the monitor, its rhythmic beeping strangely comforting. Each pulse of light felt like a heartbeat of hope. He leaned closer to Martha and spoke quietly. Do you remember the day she first came to my office? Martha's lips curved into a tired smile. I do. She told me later she was scared, but wanted to be brave for me. She was brave for all of us, Alexander said softly. She reminded me what it means to care. Martha looked at him, her eyes glistening. You gave her the chance to believe the world could be kind. That is something she will never forget. He nodded, swallowing hard. She gave me something too, the courage to change. The night stretched on. The snow outside fell in soft waves, blanketing the city in white silence. The world beyond that hospital window seemed distant, as though time itself had slowed to match the pace of that fragile heartbeat. Around midnight, Lila stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked around the room, disoriented for a moment. "Mom?" she whispered weakly. Martha immediately leaned in. "I am here, sweetheart." Lila's gaze shifted to Alexander, and her lips curved into a faint smile. "You did not leave." "Of course not," he said gently. "I told you I would be here." "Did they fix me?" she asked, her small voice fragile but curious. "Yes, baby," Martha said, tears filling her eyes. "The doctor said you were going to be just fine." Lila looked relieved. "Good, because I still have to finish my drawing." Alexander chuckled softly, his voice breaking with emotion. "You can finish it when you are ready." "It is for you," she said sleepily. "It is a big Sunday. Bigger than the first one." "I cannot wait to see it," he whispered. She smiled faintly before drifting back to sleep. Martha wiped her eyes quietly. "She has your determination," Alexander said, trying to lighten the mood. "No," Martha replied softly. "She has her own." The next morning, sunlight poured through the blinds, soft and golden. The city outside began to stir, unaware of the small miracle unfolding in that hospital room. Lila's color had returned, and her breathing was stronger. When the doctor came in, he smiled. "She is recovering beautifully. Children are resilient. With rest, she will be home soon." Relief swept through the room like a wave. Martha thanked the doctor again and again, her voice trembling with gratitude. After the doctor left, Alexander stood by the window, looking out at the waking city. The skyline shimmered under the morning sun, and for a brief moment, he saw it differently, not as towers of ambition but as symbols of possibility. Martha joined him at the window. "You did not have to stay all night," she said softly. "I wanted to," he replied. "Sometimes the most important meetings in life happen far away from any office." She smiled at that. "You really have changed." "No," he said quietly. "I finally remembered who I was meant to be." Later that afternoon, as they prepared to take Lila home, she asked for her sketchbook. Sitting up carefully, she began to draw with slow, deliberate strokes. When she was finished, she held it up proudly. The picture showed the Shine Center with sunlight spreading over it, and in front of it were three figures, Martha, Lila, and Alexander holding hands beneath the words, "Hope shines here." He stared at it for a long time, his throat tightening. "It is perfect," he said softly. "Can I keep it?" "It is for everyone," Lila said. "You can hang it at the Shine Center so people know it is a happy place." He smiled and nodded. "I will. It will hang right where everyone can see it." As they left the hospital, the crisp winter air filled their lungs, and the sky was a brilliant blue. Alexander looked down at the little girl walking between him and her mother, her small hand gripping his tightly. In that moment, he knew that every struggle, every sleepless night, every battle for kindness had been worth it. Because the world had one more reason to shine, and her name was Lila. 2 weeks after Lila was released from the hospital, the Shine Center held its most emotional gathering yet. The moment she returned, the entire staff and volunteers welcomed her with cheers and balloons. Someone had even placed a huge banner across the entrance that read, "Welcome back, our sunshine." Lila laughed as she walked inside, holding her mother's hand. Her steps were slower, but her smile was brighter than ever. Alexander stood at the front door, waiting with open arms. "There she is," he said warmly, "our hero." Lila ran toward him, and he knelt down so she could hug him. "You are supposed to rest, not run marathons," he teased gently. She giggled. "I rested enough. I missed everyone." "We missed you too," he said. Behind her, Martha smiled, her eyes glistening with quiet gratitude. "She has not stopped talking about coming back here," she said softly. "I think this place is part of her heartbeat now." "She is part of its light," Alexander replied. Inside the center, everything was decorated in yellow, the color Lila loved most. The walls were covered with drawings from the children, many of them pictures of the sun, each one slightly different but all radiating joy. In the middle of the room, on a special easel, stood Lila's newest drawing, the one she had made in the hospital. It was framed and surrounded by flowers. Beneath it hung a new sign that read, "The Lila Lewis Art Room." When she saw it, her little hands flew to her mouth. "You named a room after me?" she gasped. "You earned it," Alexander said with a smile. "This is where children will come to paint, draw, and dream, just like you." Her eyes filled with happy tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "You made my dream real." As the day went on, families gathered to celebrate, not just Lila's return, but the spirit of healing that had become the center's heartbeat. Reporters and local officials attended. But for Alexander, it was never about publicity. He stood quietly in the background, watching children laugh and volunteers serve food, feeling the kind of peace that success alone could never give. Later that afternoon, Lila tugged at his sleeve. "Can we go outside for a second?" she asked. He nodded, and they stepped out into the garden behind the center. The air was cool and filled with the scent of blooming flowers. The garden had been Lila's idea months ago, a small patch of earth that volunteers had turned into a place of rest and reflection. Now it was thriving, filled with sunflowers that swayed gently in the breeze. "They are all grown," she said proudly. "You said a sunflower needs love to grow, so we gave them lots." "And look what they did," Alexander said, kneeling beside her. They reached for the light. She looked up at him curiously. "Is that what you did too?" He smiled. "Maybe I did, but you were the one who showed me where to look." She thought for a moment before saying softly, "Everyone deserves a little light." "Yes," he said quietly, "even those who think they do not." A few days later, Alexander called a meeting with his executive board. He had been thinking deeply about the company's future, about how to protect the heart of what they had built. Standing before the group, he began, "I know some of you are still worried about our direction, but I have made my decision. Coal Industries will become a hybrid model, half profit, half purpose. From now on, the Shine Initiative will not be a side project. It will be our core." The boardroom erupted in whispers. One of the older directors frowned. "That is unprecedented. You are putting social responsibility ahead of profit." "No," Alexander said firmly. "I am aligning them. Because when we invest in people, we invest in the future. That is the only profit that lasts." The room fell silent again. Finally, the chairman leaned back and said, "Then I suppose we will see if your light can outshine tradition." Alexander smiled faintly. "It already has." Weeks passed, and the change became official. Employees across the company began volunteering at the Shine Centers. Departments once focused solely on sales and marketing started creating community-based programs. The media called it the coal model, a revolution in corporate culture. But for Alexander, it was simply the right thing to do. One evening, he returned to the original center to find Martha closing up for the night. "You are still working," he said. "You too," she replied with a smirk. He laughed. "Touché." She looked at him thoughtfully. "Do you ever stop to realize how far you have come?" He paused, considering her words. "Sometimes," he said, "but mostly, I just keep moving toward the light." "That is the thing about light," she said softly. "It always finds you, even when you forget to look for it." Just then, Lila appeared in the doorway, holding 3 cups of hot cocoa. "You two talk too much," she teased. "Time for a break." Alexander took a cup and smiled. "You are right, as always." They sat together on the steps outside, watching the streetlights flicker on. The world around them buzzed softly, alive with quiet beauty. For a long time, none of them spoke. They just sat in the glow of everything they had built together, proof that kindness could survive in any world, if only someone was brave enough to protect it. When the night breeze picked up, Lila leaned her head on her mother's shoulder and said drowsily, "We made the world a little brighter, didn't we?" Alexander looked at her and whispered, "You did, Lila. You truly did." By the time autumn returned, the Shine Initiative had become a story known across the country. Newspapers called it a new kind of leadership. Universities invited Alexander Cole to speak about moral capitalism, and social organizations began replicating the model in other cities. But for Alexander, success was no longer measured in headlines or accolades. It was found in the quiet moments like the laughter echoing through the art room named after Lila, or the sight of volunteers sharing meals with strangers as if they had known each other for years. One cool October morning, Alexander stood in front of the main Shine Center, admiring how the rising sun illuminated the glass facade. Inside, Lila was teaching a group of younger children how to draw sunflowers. Her voice carried across the hallway, soft and confident. "You do not have to make it perfect," she said. "Just make it happy." Martha, now director of the nationwide Shine Network, watched proudly from the doorway. She turned to Alexander, who had joined her quietly. "She has grown up so fast," Martha said. "She is still the same girl who believes sunshine can fix anything," he replied. "Maybe she is right," she said, smiling. "Maybe she always was." Over the next few months, Alexander dedicated himself to turning the Shine Initiative into a permanent foundation independent from coal industries. "If I ever step down," he told the board, "the light must keep burning without me." He spent long hours reviewing documents, building a board of trustees, and ensuring every center would be self-sustaining. Melissa, his trusted assistant, often found him in the office late at night. "Sir," she said one evening, placing a cup of coffee on his desk, "you have not gone home in 2 days." He smiled wearily. "You know, Melissa, I used to stay up this late chasing numbers. Now I stay up chasing meaning. It feels different." "It looks different, too," she said softly. "You seem at peace." He looked out the window where the city lights shimmered like tiny suns. "I am," he said. "For the first time, I am." One chilly Saturday, the Shine Center hosted its annual Harvest Festival, a community event that had grown into one of the city's most beloved traditions. The courtyard overflowed with families, food stalls, music, and laughter. Children ran around carrying paper suns, and volunteers distributed warm meals to anyone who needed one. Alexander, dressed in a simple sweater and jeans, moved through the crowd greeting people like an old friend. When he reached the art booth, Lila waved him over. "Alexander, come paint with us," she called. "I do not know if I am any good at painting," he said. "That is not the rule," she replied, handing him a brush. "The only rule is to shine." So he dipped his brush into the yellow paint and began filling in the center of a giant sun on the mural they were creating. By the end, the wall was covered with handprints, signatures, and little messages written in bright colors. Across the top, in bold letters, were the words, "We shine together." As the festival went on, a local news crew arrived to cover the event. They asked Alexander for an interview, and though he usually declined media attention, this time he agreed. Standing in front of the mural, he said, "This began with one small act of courage. A little girl came into my office one morning and reminded me that leadership is not about status, it is about service. Every person you see here today is proof that kindness can build something stronger than fear or greed. It builds connection, and connection is what keeps us human." The clip aired that evening, and within hours, the internet lit up with comments and stories from people around the world inspired to start their own Shine projects. But while the world celebrated, Alexander remained grounded. After the festival ended, he stayed behind to help clean up. Lila and Martha joined him, stacking chairs and collecting leftover supplies. "You know," Martha said, looking around the courtyard, "when I first started cleaning offices to support Lila, I never imagined this would be our life." "Neither did I," Alexander admitted. "But maybe the best things are the ones we do not plan." "You mean like kindness?" she asked. He nodded. "Exactly like kindness." As they finished cleaning, Lila came running over, holding a paper lantern. "We forgot to light these," she said excitedly. She handed one to each of them. "We have to make a wish first." Alexander smiled. "All right, Lila, what is your wish?" She thought for a moment, then said softly, "That people never stop shining, even when life gets dark." Martha looked down at her daughter, her eyes glistening. That is a good wish. What about you, Alexander? Lila asked. He hesitated, then said, My wish is simple, that I never forget what light feels like. Together, they lit the lanterns and released them into the cool night air. Dozens of glowing orbs floated upward, joining the stars above. The three of them stood watching as the lights drifted higher and higher until they became one with the sky. For a moment, it was as if time stood still, the city silent, the world wrapped in a soft golden glow. And as the final lantern disappeared into the darkness, Alexander Cole whispered under his breath, When we shine kindness, we all shine. Martha heard him and smiled. You really believe that, don't you? With everything I have, he said, because I have seen what happens when we do. Winter returned once more, but this year the city did not feel cold. The shine centers were now alive in every major region, each one glowing like a beacon through the snow. Alexander Cole had officially transitioned coal industries into the Shine Foundation, a nonprofit network that balanced innovation with compassion. The newspapers called it the Revolution of Heart, and even his harshest critics had grown silent. Yet Alexander never saw it as a revolution, he saw it as redemption. On a snowy December morning, he stood in his office overlooking the city skyline. The air was crisp, the streets below covered in soft white, and from this height, he could see the distant roof of the original Shine Center. A single ray of light reflected off its glass windows, cutting through the gray sky like a promise. The knock on his door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Melissa, carrying a stack of envelopes. Morning mail, sir. Most of them are holiday letters from the centers. Alexander smiled. Thank you. Leave them here. I will read every one of them. She nodded, hesitated, then added, You have been invited to the community dinner at the original center tonight. Martha said she and Lila are saving you a seat. Then I would not dare miss it, he said with a grin. That evening, Alexander arrived just as the first snowflakes began to fall again. Inside, the Shine Center glowed with warmth, children decorating cookies, parents chatting over coffee, volunteers wrapping gifts for local families. Lila spotted him from across the room and ran over, wearing a bright yellow scarf. You made it, she exclaimed. Would I ever miss your famous hot cocoa? He said playfully. Come on, we saved you a seat, she said, pulling his hand. Martha looked up from the table as they approached, her smile soft and full of meaning. I was starting to think you would not come, she teased. You know better than that, he replied, removing his coat. You two are my family now. The words came out naturally, but they carried a truth deeper than any of them could have imagined. As the evening went on, people took turns sharing stories about what the Shine Centers meant to them. One man spoke about finding a job after years of unemployment. A young mother thanked them for helping her finish school. And an elderly woman, her voice trembling, said simply, You gave me a reason to get up in the morning. Each story filled the room with emotion. Alexander listened quietly, humbled. When it was his turn to speak, he stood, holding his mug of cocoa. A few years ago, I thought success was about power, he began. I thought leadership meant standing above others. But then a little girl walked into my office with a note from her sick mother, and she turned my world upside down. That moment taught me that real success is measured by how much light you can bring into someone else's darkness. He paused, his eyes meeting Lila's. And that light came from all of you. Every one of you here is proof that kindness is not weakness, it is strength. The room erupted in applause, and Lila clapped the loudest. After dinner, they stepped outside into the falling snow. The streetlights shimmered against the white ground, and the sound of laughter drifted from the building behind them. Lila spun around with her arms outstretched, catching snowflakes on her tongue. It feels like magic, she said. Alexander smiled. It is magic, Lila, the kind we make when we care about people. Then I want to make it forever, she said. Promise me we will keep shining. He knelt down to her level, brushing a bit of snow from her coat. That is a promise I can keep. Martha stood a few steps away, watching them with quiet affection. She really looks up to you, you know, she said as he joined her. She is going to grow up believing kindness can change the world. That is the best thing anyone could grow up believing, he replied. They walked slowly toward the parking lot, their breath misting in the air. You should know, Martha said softly, that she keeps a journal now. She writes letters to the future her. In the last one, she wrote that she wants to be like you when she grows up. He stopped for a moment, taken aback. Like me? Yes, Martha said with a small smile. But I think she already is. He looked back toward the Shine Center, where the windows glowed like golden lanterns in the dark. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The snow kept falling, soft and endless, like blessings from above. When Alexander finally spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. You know, I used to believe that light fades with time. That people forget. But she has proved me wrong. She is proof that it only grows stronger when shared. Martha nodded. Then we better keep sharing it. We will, he said. No matter what. As they stood there, a small voice called from behind. Hey, you forgot your cocoa! Lila came running through the snow, holding out 2 steaming cups. Alexander laughed, taking one. I guess you are right, he said, raising the cup in a toast. To shining together. Lila grinned, her cheeks flushed pink from the cold. To shining forever. They clinked their cups gently, the sound soft but full of meaning. The night stretched quiet and peaceful around them, and as the snow continued to fall, the 3 of them stood together, under the glow of the streetlight. A family not by blood, but by choice, bound forever by the light they had built together. The new year arrived quietly, blanketing the city in fresh snow. The Shine Centers glowed through the frost, like small suns scattered across the landscape, each one alive with laughter, music, and purpose. Alexander Cole had never seen the world look more hopeful. It had been 5 years since that morning when a little girl walked into his office and unknowingly changed the direction of his life. In that time, everything he once believed about success, wealth, and leadership had transformed into something far greater. Now, instead of power, he sought peace. Instead of applause, he sought meaning. On the morning of the Foundation's anniversary, Alexander stood by the large window of his office, watching the city awaken. The framed photograph on his desk showed 3 smiling faces himself, Martha and Lila, standing before the very first Shine Center, sunlight streaming behind them. He ran a finger across the glass, a small smile forming. Just then, his phone buzzed. It was Martha. Good morning, Alexander, she said warmly. Are you ready for today? More ready than ever, he replied. Lila has been practicing her speech all week. She is nervous but excited, Martha continued. She has nothing to worry about, Alexander said. She was born to shine. Later that afternoon, the main auditorium of the Shine Foundation filled with people from across the country. Each attendee had a story connected to the movement, a job found, a home rebuilt, a life changed. The stage was simple, adorned only with a banner that read, 5 years of light. Alexander stood at the podium, looking out over the sea of faces. 5 years ago, he began. This all started with a small act of kindness. One little girl showed us that light does not need permission to shine, it simply needs courage. He gestured toward the front row, where Lila sat beside her mother. Her yellow scarf still her favorite accessory. That light has grown into something far beyond what I imagined. But it was never just mine. It belongs to every hand that helped, every voice that encouraged, and every heart that believed. When he finished, the audience rose to their feet, the applause thunderous and sincere. Lila stood as well, clapping until her hands turned red. Then, with Martha's gentle encouragement, she walked up to the stage to give her first public speech. She looked tiny behind the podium, but her voice, though soft, carried clear through the room. When I was little, she began, my mom was sick, and I went to Mr. Cole's office to tell him she could not come to work. I was scared, but he listened to me. And that made me brave. He did not treat me like a kid. He treated me like someone who mattered. That day I learned something important. When people care, everything changes. The room grew quiet. Her eyes sparkled as she continued. Now I come to the Shine Center every week to help other kids feel brave too. I think that is what shining really means, helping someone else find their light. The crowd erupted in applause again, and Alexander felt his throat tighten. He had heard countless speeches in his life, but none had ever touched him quite like this one. When Lila finished, she walked over and hugged him. You did great, he whispered. You always said to speak from the heart, she replied with a grin. And you did, he said, smiling proudly. After the event, the three of them walked outside together. The air was crisp, and the city lights twinkled like stars. Snowflakes drifted gently down, landing on Lila's hair. "Remember when you told me sunflowers need love to grow?" she asked suddenly. "I do," Alexander said. "Well, I think people do too," she said, looking up at him. "And you gave that to everyone." He felt something warm rise in his chest. "Maybe," he said softly. "But you planted the seed." They walked in silence for a moment, their footsteps crunching softly on the snow. "Mom says you're going to take a break," Lila said after a while. Alexander nodded. "I am. It is time for new leaders to take over. The Shine Foundation belongs to all of us now." "Are you leaving forever?" she asked, her eyes wide. "No," he said quickly. "Just stepping back. Sometimes, even the brightest lights need to rest so they can shine again." She thought about that, then smiled. "Then promise me you will come back." He crouched down and met her gaze. "You have my word." That night, back in his apartment, Alexander sat by the window watching the snowfall. The city below glowed softly, each light a reminder of the countless lives intertwined with his. He opened his worn leather notebook, the same one he had carried since the beginning, and wrote his final entry. 5 years later, the light continues. It began with a child's courage, grew through a mother's strength, and flourished in the hearts of many. I may step away, but the light no longer needs me. It belongs to the world now. Closing the notebook, he looked out at the skyline one last time. The world outside was quiet, peaceful, and full of light. Somewhere across town, a little girl was probably drawing another sun, and Alexander Cole smiled, knowing that the world would keep shining because she would make sure of it. Spring returned with gentle rain and soft sunlight. The world seemed calmer, more open, as if it too had learned how to breathe again. The Shine Foundation continued to grow under Martha's leadership, and the centers had become cornerstones of compassion in every community. Alexander Cole, though no longer at the helm, remained an honorary advisor. His days were quieter now. He spent his mornings walking through the park, his afternoons visiting local centers, and his evenings writing letters to young leaders who sought his guidance. But even in his peaceful routine, one part of him always drifted back to that moment years ago when everything began with a little girl standing in his office doorway, clutching a note for her sick mother. That memory never left him. One morning, while reading through reports from the new Shine programs, Alexander received an email from Lila's school. It was an invitation. The subject line read, "Guest of Honor Student Kindness Assembly." Curious, he opened it. Lila had been selected to give the keynote speech on kindness, and she had requested that he attend. Smiling, he replied immediately, "I would not miss it for the world." A week later, Alexander walked into the school auditorium, the smell of crayons and polished wood filling the air. The students buzzed with excitement, teachers shushed the crowd, and parents filled the seats. Martha waved from the front row, motioning for him to join her. "She has been practicing all week," she whispered. "You are going to be proud." "I already am," he said. When the principal introduced Lila, the applause was warm and thunderous. She walked to the microphone with the poise of someone much older than her age. Her voice was steady but full of life. "Kindness," she began, "is not just about helping people. It is about seeing them, really seeing them. My mom always says that when you shine kindness, it comes back to you. But I learned that from someone else too." She glanced toward Alexander, her eyes soft. "A long time ago, I was just a little girl who walked into a big office because my mom was sick. I thought no one would listen to me, but someone did. And that changed everything. That person showed me that kindness can build something powerful, not just buildings or businesses, but hearts." The audience was silent, hanging on every word. "Now I help at the Shine Center after school. I draw with the little kids and remind them that no one is too small to make a big difference. Because if a scared little girl like me could start something that helps so many people, then anyone can." The crowd erupted in applause. Teachers wiped their eyes. Alexander felt something inside him swell with pride and emotion so deep it almost hurt. When the assembly ended, Lila ran to him, her face glowing. "Did I do okay?" she asked breathlessly. He laughed softly, crouching to meet her eyes. You did more than okay, Lila. You reminded me why the world still has hope. I said the truth, she replied simply. Kindness makes everything work better. It does, he said, smiling. And you are living proof. After the assembly, the three of them walked to a nearby cafe. It had become their little tradition: coffee for the adults, hot chocolate for Lila. As they sat near the window, the sunlight streaming in, Martha looked at Alexander with quiet admiration. You know, she said, I think she's going to change the world one day. She already has, he replied. She just does not realize it yet. Lila sipped her drink thoughtfully. Do you think there will always be shine centers? She asked. I hope so, Alexander said. But even if they disappeared, the light would still be here. He tapped her chest gently. Because it lives inside people now, she smiled, understanding more than her years should have allowed. Later that evening, Alexander returned home to find a small envelope in his mailbox. It had no stamp, someone had slipped it in by hand. Inside was a folded drawing, made with colored pencils. It showed the Shine Center surrounded by suns, flowers, and smiling people. At the bottom, in neat handwriting, were the words, Thank you for teaching the world to shine, from Lila. He stood there for a long time, staring at the drawing, his eyes misting. Then he placed it on his desk beside the very first one she had ever made all those years ago. The crayon sun drawn by a little girl who believed kindness could fix anything. The two drawings sat side by side, like bookends to a story he could never have written himself. That night, he stepped out onto his balcony. The city glowed below. Every street lamp and window, like a fragment of light, passed from one heart to another. The wind carried the distant laughter of children playing, and the faint hum of life pulsed through the night. He whispered softly to no one and everyone at once, When we shine kindness, we all shine. And somewhere across the city, in a small apartment filled with warmth and love, a young girl sat at her desk drawing another sun, still carrying forward the light that had once begun with her simple, brave words. Mom is sick, so I came instead. Years later, the world had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Shine Foundation had spread to dozens of countries, its yellow sun logo now, a global symbol of hope. Schools taught the Shine principle. Companies adopted the Coal model. And entire communities had rebuilt themselves around the idea that kindness was not weakness but the truest form of strength. Yet at the heart of it all, one story remained. The story of a little girl who had once walked into an office with a note clutched in her hand. On a bright summer morning, years after that moment, the original Shine Center stood tall, surrounded by gardens in full bloom. Children's laughter drifted through the open doors, the air filled with the scent of sunflowers. Inside, a bronze plaque hung on the wall. It read, Dedicated to those who choose light when the world offers darkness. Underneath it, engraved in smaller letters, were the words, Inspired by Lila Lewis and the kindness that built a legacy. On that morning, Alexander Cole returned to the Shine Center for the first time in nearly a year. His hair had turned silver, but his eyes still carried the same warmth they always had. He walked slowly through the halls, his cane tapping softly against the polished floor. Everywhere he looked, he saw reminders of how far they had come, murals painted by children, photos of volunteers, handwritten notes from families whose lives had been touched. As he reached the art room, he stopped at the doorway. The walls were covered with new drawings, suns, hearts, and colorful phrases like Be kind, Help others, and We shine together. At the center of the room stood a young woman surrounded by children, teaching them to mix colors. Her voice was calm and familiar. Remember, she said, the most important color is not on your brush, it is in your heart. Alexander smiled softly. Lila turned around and froze for a moment before her face lit up. Alexander, she exclaimed, rushing to hug him. You came. Of course I came, he said, holding her tightly. I wanted to see how my favorite artist is doing. She laughed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I am not a little kid anymore. No, he said, studying her proudly. You are the woman I always knew you would become. Lila smiled, her eyes shining. Do you want to see something? She led him to the far wall, where a new painting hung. It showed 3 figures standing beneath a giant sun, the same 3 who had started it all. Underneath, she had written, "When we shine kindness, we all shine." His throat tightened as he traced the painted letters with his fingers. "You remembered," he said softly. "How could I forget?" She replied, "You taught it to me." Martha entered the room then, carrying a tray of lemonade. Her hair had streaks of gray now, but her smile was exactly the same. "Well," she said with a laugh, "if this is not a full circle moment, you two have turned this place into something far beyond what I imagined," Alexander said. "No," Martha corrected gently, "you gave us the light. We just helped it reach farther." They sat together by the window, watching the children paint. The sunlight poured in, warm and golden, illuminating the room like a blessing. After a while, Lila turned to him and said, "We are hosting the 10-year anniversary celebration next week. You have to give the closing speech." Alexander chuckled. "I think people have heard enough of my speeches." "Not this one," she insisted. "This one will be about family, because that is what Shine really is." He looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, he felt tears gather in his eyes. "Then I will be there," he promised. "I would not miss it for the world." A week later, the celebration took place in the same courtyard where it had all begun. The entire community gathered, old faces and new, volunteers, families, children who had grown up with the program. The sky glowed orange and pink as the sun began to set, casting long golden rays over the crowd. Alexander stepped up to the stage with slow but steady steps. The microphone crackled softly as he began to speak. 10 years ago, I was a man who thought leadership was about control. Then a little girl reminded me that real leadership is about compassion. That small act of courage changed everything. And today, when I look around, I see proof that kindness is the strongest force in the world. It builds bridges, heals hearts, and connects souls. He paused, letting his words settle. We have built something that will outlive all of us. But what matters most is not the buildings or the programs, it is the promise we made to each other. The promise that light will always be stronger than darkness. The audience rose to their feet, clapping and cheering, their faces glowing in the fading light. As the applause quieted, Alexander turned to Lila and Martha, standing at the edge of the stage. "This was never my story alone," he said. "It was ours." The crowd erupted again. As the evening turned to night, hundreds of paper lanterns were lit, just as they had done years before. One by one they floated upward, glowing softly against the deep blue sky. Alexander watched them rise, his heart full. Lila stood beside him, her hand in his, her voice gentle. "You did it, Alexander," she said. "No," he replied, smiling at her. "We did it." The lanterns drifted higher, disappearing into the stars. The world below shimmered with reflected light streets, windows, hearts, all glowing as one. And as Alexander Cole looked up at the sky, he whispered the words that had carried him through every storm, every joy, every year of his second life. "When we shine kindness, we all shine." In that moment, the world felt infinite and the light eternal.